June 6, 1992. A night meant for celebrating futures. For three women in Springfield, Missouri, it would be the last night anyone ever saw them again. Suzanne Streeter, Stacy McCall, Sherrill Levitt. 3 lives, 1 night, 0 explanations. A front door left slightly open. A porch light shattered. Purses neatly arranged on a living room chair. Car keys still sitting on the kitchen counter. No signs of struggle. No screams heard. Just silence. A mystery that has tormented a community and baffled investigators for more than 30 years. Suzanne, Stacy, Sherrill. What happened inside that house remains one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in American history. If you want to help us unravel this decades-old enigma, join us. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell, because what you're about to witness will leave you questioning everything. A summer night in Springfield. The night of June 6, 1992, was one of those ordinary Midwestern nights that felt safe, almost predictable. In Springfield, Missouri, summer evenings carried a rhythm. The hum of air conditioners echoed across small neighborhoods. Porch lights glowed faintly, and families dozed in the comfort of their homes. It was the kind of town where neighbors waved, where lawns were trimmed neatly, and where life unfolded without much drama. But that Saturday wasn't just another night. For Stacy McCall and Suzanne Streeter, it was a celebration of endings and beginnings. High school was behind them. The world lay ahead. No one could have imagined that, before sunrise, they would vanish without a trace, along with Susie's mother, Sherrill Levitt. Graduation day had been filled with joy. At Kickapoo High School, Stacy and Susie walked the stage in cap and gown, faces bright with possibility. Stacy, tall, with sandy blonde hair, was known for her kindness and quiet charm. She dreamed of becoming a nurse, of helping people, of building a future step by step. Susie, smaller, with platinum blonde hair and a spark of independence, was feisty, sharp-witted, and carried herself with a kind of confidence that drew people in. Families snapped pictures, friends laughed, teachers offered congratulations. It was a day of photographs, hugs, and promises. We'll keep in touch. We'll see each other soon. The night was meant for celebration, and like every group of graduates, they made plans to bounce between parties, soaking in the last hours of childhood before stepping into adulthood. As night turned into early morning, exhaustion began to win out. The girls had originally planned to spend the night at a friend's house, but when they arrived, the house was overcrowded. Dozens of teenagers sprawled across couches and carpets, asleep or half asleep, voices still murmuring into the dark. It was hot, uncomfortable, and chaotic. Stacy, who liked order, wasn't thrilled at the idea of being crammed onto a floor with little space. Susie wasn't either. They wanted sleep, real sleep, because the next morning they had plans to go to Whitewater, a water park, with friends. So, around 2 a.m., they decided to head back to Susie's house on 1717 East Delmar Street, where her mother, Sherrill, lived. It was a simple, quiet decision, the kind people make without realizing it will change everything. Back on East Delmar Street, Sherrill Levitt was likely already asleep. At 47 years old, Sherrill was hardworking, meticulous, and independent. She had worked that evening at the hair salon and returned home alone. Her daughter was her world, and though she worried, as all mothers do, she trusted Susie's judgment. The house was modest but tidy, a reflection of Sherrill herself. A small yard, a porch light glowing, curtains drawn. Inside, Cinnamon, her beloved little Yorkshire Terrier, padded quietly through the rooms. It was, by all appearances, a peaceful home. Around 2:15 a.m., Stacy and Susie arrived. Their cars parked outside. Their purses carried inside. They were safe. They were home. No neighbors reported hearing anything unusual. No screams. No crashes. No struggle. Just silence. Yet, within hours, all three women would be gone. Later, investigators would describe the house as eerily intact. 3 purses lined neatly on a chair in the living room. Keys resting untouched on the kitchen counter. Cigarettes, makeup, daily items left behind. Beds unslept in. A book left open on the bed. The TV turned to static. The only disturbance was outside. The porch light, its protective globe shattered, shards swept aside as if by human hand. And, perhaps most haunting of all, the answering machine had recorded a message that investigators believe could be crucial. But before anyone realized its importance, the message was erased. Lost forever. Inside, Cinnamon the dog paced nervously, barking when visitors arrived the next day. When morning came, plans unraveled. At 9 a.m., Stacy's mother, Janice McCall, expected her daughter to call before leaving for Whitewater. Stacy had promised, but the phone never rang. Janice called the Levitt house herself. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. The silence tightened her stomach with unease. Finally, she decided to drive over. When she arrived, the cars were still parked outside. Relief flickered for a moment. Maybe they were just sleeping in. But as she entered, the relief turned to dread. The purses were there. The dog was there. Everything was there, except the people. Janice wandered the rooms, calling out names. Stacy, Susie, Sherrill. Silence. The beds were untouched. The dog barked, agitated. The house felt wrong, too still, too empty. Janice knew instantly that something was not right. By late morning, worried friends arrived at the house as well. One by one, they entered, each adding to the chaos of the scene. They picked up the phone, checked messages, moved items. One even swept the broken glass from the porch, thinking it might hurt someone's feet. None of them realized they were erasing evidence with every touch, every good intention. They were simply worried, trying to help. No one was thinking like an investigator. By the time police were officially called, the scene was already compromised. Police arrived, expecting perhaps to find an explanation, a note, a clue, a lead. Instead, they found nothing. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no valuables missing. It was as though 3 women had simply evaporated from the safety of their home. In the days and years to come, investigators would chase thousands of tips, question suspects, follow leads into forests, farms, and even under parking garages. But on that morning, all they had was confusion. News of the disappearance spread quickly. 3 women gone. Overnight. Without sound, without struggle. The community reeled. Springfield was not a city known for violent crime. People began locking their doors, checking on their neighbors, wondering if a predator was walking among them. Parents held their daughters closer. Teenagers who had celebrated freedom the night before now faced curfews and fear. Something unthinkable had happened, and no one knew why. That day marked the start of one of the most chilling mysteries in American history. 3 women, 1 house, no explanations. And so the story of the Springfield Three began, not with answers, but with silence. By mid-morning on June 7th, 1992, the Levitt house at 1717 East Delmar Street had become a revolving door. Friends, family, and neighbors came and went, all sharing the same disbelief. How could 3 women just be gone? By the time Springfield police officially arrived, the scene no longer looked like a crime scene. It looked like an ordinary home, tidied up by worried hands. The broken glass on the porch had been swept. The phones had been answered. The answering machine checked. Even drawers had been opened in search of a note or clue. Every instinct that told visitors to fix things also erased things. Without knowing, they had wiped away the fingerprints of the night. The officers on duty initially hesitated to treat the case as serious. After all, missing person cases often began with voluntary disappearances, adults deciding to leave, teens slipping away. But the details didn't fit. 3 purses sat side by side, untouched. Cars parked outside, keys still inside. Cigarettes, money, makeup, all left behind. A dog left alone, frantic but unharmed. Sherrill, Susie, and Stacy had not planned to leave. Everything pointed to them being interrupted. The more the officers looked, the more unease settled in. Something had happened here. Something deliberate. One of the first chilling discoveries was the answering machine. A message had been left during the night. Police believed it might hold a clue, perhaps even the voice of the abductor. But by the time they tried to retrieve it, someone had already erased it. To this day, no one knows what the message said. It remains one of the most haunting what-ifs of the case. As word spread, Springfield transformed overnight. Flyers plastered windows, telephone poles, and store entrances. News crews set up cameras. Neighbors whispered about strange vans, suspicious men, unexplained noises. The case dominated conversation. 3 women, gone from a safe home in a safe town. It was the nightmare parents used to scare their kids into caution, but this was real. Police phone lines were flooded with tips. Every rumor became a lead. Every lead became a desperate chase. Among the flood of tips, one image persisted: a green van. Several callers reported seeing a suspicious van around East Delmar Street in the early hours of June 7th. One even claimed to have seen the women inside. The lead seemed promising. Police went so far as to paint a van green to display it publicly, asking anyone if they recognized it. But despite the attention, the tip led nowhere. Like so many others, it dissolved into speculation. It wasn't long before suspicion turned toward men with violent pasts. One name that surfaced was Robert Craig Cox. He was no stranger to law enforcement, a convicted kidnapper and robber with a chilling history. At the time of the disappearance, he was living in Springfield. Cox was interviewed but denied involvement. Years later, while in prison, he would taunt investigators and reporters. He claimed he knew the Springfield Three were dead. He claimed they were murdered the very night they disappeared. He even claimed he knew where the bodies were. But Cox refused to give details. "Until after my mother dies," he said. His words dangled like bait, tormenting families, frustrating police. Was he telling the truth? Or was he a manipulator feeding on tragedy? Without evidence, Cox remained just a suspect on paper. Other men drew suspicion. Gerald Carnahan, later convicted of rape and murder in a different case, was investigated. His violent history fit a profile, but no evidence tied him to the Springfield Three. Dustin Rekla, Susie's ex-boyfriend, was questioned. Rumors swirled about his involvement in shady dealings. He took a polygraph and passed. Police cleared him. Each name raised hope, then collapsed into nothing. Police and volunteers scoured Springfield. Helicopters searched from above. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Landfills, rivers, farms, and forests were combed for any sign. At one point, a rumor led investigators to a farm belonging to a motorcycle gang member. Another pointed to Mark Twain National Forest. Nothing. Years later, a construction worker claimed that the women were buried under a hospital parking garage built not long after the disappearance. The story sparked public obsession. Was it possible the women lay just beneath the concrete, hidden in plain sight? Ground-penetrating radar was used. Some anomalies were detected, but no digging was authorized. The lead went cold, leaving only unanswered questions. By the end of the first week, the case had become national news. It was featured on America's Most Wanted. Later, it appeared on 48 Hours, Disappeared, and People magazine Investigates. Each airing brought new attention, new tips, and new heartbreak when nothing came of them. The faces of Sherrill, Susie, and Stacy stared from TV screens, newspapers, and billboards. They became symbols of absence, three women frozen in time. For the families, each day was agony. Janice McCall, Stacy's mother, refused to give up. She organized searches, called press conferences, begged for answers. Her voice became one of strength, but inside, she lived with constant dread. Sherrill's relatives held on to hope, but struggled with despair. How could a woman who worked so hard, who lived so simply, be swallowed by something so dark? Susie's friends, who had celebrated with her just hours before, lived with survivor's guilt. They replayed every decision, every word, wondering if something they did, or didn't do, had sealed her fate. The emotional weight of the case spread through Springfield like a fog. As weeks turned into months, fear tightened its grip. Springfield was no longer the same safe town. Doors were locked earlier. Teenagers who once roamed freely were given strict curfews. Women looked over their shoulders in parking lots. The idea that someone could enter a home, take three women, and leave without a trace made everyone suspicious. If it could happen to them, it could happen to anyone. By the end of 1992, the investigation had hit a wall. Thousands of tips had been processed, dozens of suspects interviewed, countless hours spent chasing shadows. But there were no bodies, no crime scene, no confession that could be proven. It was as though the night had swallowed the Springfield Three whole, leaving behind only whispers. Investigators replayed the details endlessly. Who shattered the porch light and why? What was on the erased answering machine message? Why were the purses, keys, and cars left untouched? Did someone the women knew knock on the door that night? Every question remained open, and with every passing day, answers felt further away. The first hours of any disappearance are the most critical. In the case of the Springfield Three, those hours were lost to panic, to contamination, to confusion. By the time investigators realized the magnitude of the crime, the trail was already ice cold. What began as a night of joy had twisted into one of the darkest mysteries in American history. The investigation had started, but the truth had slipped away. When a case leaves no evidence, no witnesses, and no answers, the human mind does what it has always done. It fills the void with imagination. And in Springfield, Missouri, after June 7th, 1992, that void was vast. 3 women were gone. No bodies, no blood, no forced entry. Just a house full of belongings left behind like the owners had stepped out for only a moment. The questions spread faster than any official police report could contain them. At coffee shops, hushed voices speculated over steaming mugs. At the local barber shop, men leaned in close, asking if anyone had heard something new. Parents whispered during PTA meetings. Teenagers traded rumors in dimly lit basements. Everyone had an idea. Everyone had a theory. Some sounded plausible. Others were born of fear and desperation. But each carried the same haunting question. What really happened to Sherrill Levitt, Suzanne "Susie" Streeter, and Stacy McCall? The possibilities were endless, and each was terrifying. The most chilling explanation is also the simplest: an abduction by a stranger. Picture it: a man lurking in the shadows, studying the house on East Del Mar Street. Maybe he had been watching for weeks. Maybe he knew Susie and Stacy had graduation parties that night, that they would stumble home exhausted, eager only for sleep. The broken porch light takes on new meaning here. Was it an accident? Or had the stalker deliberately shattered it, ensuring the women would return to a house cloaked in darkness? Inside, the answering machine message was erased before police could hear it. Did the killer leave his voice on tape, then erase it in panic? Or was it a calculated move, taunting investigators, ensuring one more piece of evidence was lost forever? In this scenario, the stranger enters the home swiftly. Perhaps he carried a gun. One woman screams, but he silences her with a threat. Quiet, or you all die. Susie, Stacy, and Sherrill comply. Terrified, confused, believing compliance might save them, he marches them out into the night. A neighbor's dog barks. A curtain flutters, but no one sees. And then vanished. But how? Could a single man control 3 women at once without drawing attention? Some argue it's possible only with a weapon. Others believe there had to be more than one abductor. Still, no trace of such a man has ever been found. No fingerprints, no DNA, no clothing fibers or tire tracks. If a stranger did it, he was a ghost, leaving nothing behind but silence. The second theory cuts even deeper. What if it wasn't a stranger at all? What if the women knew their abductor? Consider the details. No forced entry, no signs of a struggle. The house was too neat, as if they had stepped out voluntarily. Purses and keys sat untouched, like the women had only expected to step outside for a quick word. Would they have opened the door to a stranger at 2 a.m.? Unlikely. But to a friend? A neighbor? A familiar face? Absolutely. That is where this theory darkens. The possibility that someone they trusted harbored unthinkable darkness. Susie's ex-boyfriend has been whispered about in Springfield for decades. The two had a rocky history, and rumors swirled that he, or his friends, may have harbored a grudge. Others point to acquaintances with criminal ties, men who might have seen opportunity in the late-night return of 2 young graduates. None have ever been proven guilty, yet suspicion lingers, poisoning relationships, dividing the town. Because if the women were taken by someone they knew, that means the danger was never out there. It was always closer than anyone wanted to admit. Perhaps the most infamous theory came years later, whispered with the weight of conspiracy. The Cox South Hospital parking garage. In 1993, construction crews poured fresh concrete for the foundation. Months later, a tipster came forward, claiming the women's bodies had been buried within that concrete, forever sealed beneath the city itself. It sounded outrageous, like an urban legend, until ground-penetrating radar revealed 3 distinct anomalies beneath the surface. 3 shapes, roughly the size of graves. The story exploded. Could it really be true? Could Sherrill, Susie, and Stacy lie beneath the very feet of hospital visitors, hidden in plain sight? Families begged police to excavate, but the cost would be millions, and officials refused. Without undeniable proof, the garage was never torn apart. And so, This theory lingers like a wound that cannot heal. Thousands of Springfield residents drive over that garage every day, wondering if the truth lies just a few feet below their tires. Some believe it with unshakable certainty. Others dismiss it as a cruel distraction. But the radar scans remain, and the questions they raise have never been silenced. Among all the whispers, one image refuses to fade: the green van. Several witnesses claim to see a van in the early hours of June 7th, parked near the Levitt home. One woman swore she saw Susie slumped inside, her face pressed against the glass. Was it exhaustion or unconsciousness? Police followed the lead with intensity. They even staged their own van, driving it around neighborhoods to spark recognition. But no solid lead emerged. The description was too vague, the sightings too inconsistent. The green van became a phantom vehicle, always close, never caught. Yet for many in Springfield, it remains the most plausible explanation. They were loaded into a van and driven away. End of story. Even today, when locals recall the case, the words green van almost always surface. It has become as much a part of the legend as the broken porch light or the erased message. A vehicle that may never have existed, or one that carried away the Springfield Three into darkness. No discussion of the Springfield Three can avoid the shadow of Robert Craig Cox. In 1992, Cox was living in Springfield. His past was violent. Convicted of kidnapping, linked to murder, a man who had already proven capable of cruelty. Years later, from a Texas prison, Cox granted interviews. His words chilled every listener. "They're dead," he said. "They were killed the same night. I know what happened, and I'll tell the whole story one day." The arrogance was suffocating. Cox toyed with the families like a predator playing with prey. Was he lying, feeding on tragedy to keep himself in the headlines? Or was he the one man alive who truly knew the truth? Authorities investigated. They searched his history, his connections. But with no bodies, no evidence, and only his cryptic words, they had nothing to charge him with. And so, Robert Craig Cox remains a ghost at the edge of this story. A man who may know everything, or nothing at all. A man who promises answers only when it suits him. For the families, his name is salt in the wound. For Springfield, his shadow is another reason the case has never rested. Finally, there are those who believe the abduction wasn't random or personal, but professional. A calculated, clinical operation. This theory suggests the women saw something they shouldn't have. Maybe Sherrill, as a hairdresser, overheard dangerous talk. Maybe Susie or Stacy stumbled across information at a party that night. And so, the women were silenced, not in rage, but in cold, organized precision. Professionals don't leave evidence. They don't make mistakes. They remove threats efficiently and disappear without a trace. This explanation would account for the eerie lack of struggle, the absence of physical evidence, and the way the women seemed to simply vanish from the earth. But if true, it means the answers lie far beyond Springfield's quiet streets. It means the disappearance wasn't about chance, but about power and secrets buried deeper than anyone dares to admit. For the families, each theory has been a double-edged sword. Hope, because any theory might be the key. Heartbreak, because every theory ends the same way: the women are gone. Janice McCall, Stacy's mother, has chased tips for decades. Each one offers a spark of hope, a glimmer that her daughter might be found. Each one ends in silence. Susie's friends replay their choices from that night, haunted by what-ifs. Sherrill's relatives struggle with a grief compounded by endless uncertainty. Every year, the theories grow wilder. Every year, the pain grows heavier. Because behind every theory, every rumor, every whispered possibility, one fact remains unshakable. 3 women walked into that house, and not one of them ever walked out. The swirl of possibilities didn't just live in police files or late-night television specials. They burrowed into everyday life in Springfield. People whispered them at kitchen tables, at church gatherings, and in the aisles of grocery stores. Each theory was like a ghost, invisible, intangible, but always hovering. And among the most enduring, most haunting possibilities was a man whose name kept resurfacing, Robert Craig Cox. Cox wasn't just another face in a crowd. He was a convicted kidnapper and suspected murderer. His history painted a portrait of someone both cunning and cruel, the kind of man who thrived in the cracks of society's blind spots. Back in the 1970s, Cox had been arrested and convicted in Florida for the murder of a young woman. That conviction was later overturned on appeal, but by then, Cox had already earned a reputation with law enforcement, a man capable of monstrous acts. He also served time in Texas for a kidnapping. He was no stranger to prison walls, nor to the kind of violence that chills the blood. In the mid-1990s, Cox was living in Springfield. He was questioned by investigators about the Springfield Three, and he didn't hesitate to make himself memorable. In interviews, Cox gave conflicting stories about his whereabouts on the night of June 6, 1992. At first, he claimed he was at church with his girlfriend, but when pressed, the timeline didn't quite add up. Later, he changed his story, a tactic that investigators recognized as a hallmark of deception. What made Cox particularly chilling wasn't just his background or his contradictions. It was his words. In a 1997 interview with a Springfield news outlet, he all but taunted the city. Cox claimed he knew what had happened to the 3 women and that they would never be found alive. He insisted he wouldn't say more until his mother passed away. That cryptic message left a scar on Springfield's collective psyche. Was he telling the truth? Or was this another cruel manipulation, a man feeding on fear and notoriety? Investigators couldn't confirm his involvement, but the ambiguity was worse than certainty. Because with Cox, people could believe it. They could see him as the type of man who might orchestrate such a disappearance, then grin while holding the secret for decades. Then came a theory born not of chance, but of precision. Some whispered that this wasn't random, nor impulsive, but planned. That the abduction of 3 women at once, from a quiet neighborhood, without a trace, suggested professionals. Under this theory, the Springfield Three were victims of a calculated operation. Perhaps they had seen something they shouldn't have. Perhaps they had been mistakenly identified. Or perhaps someone with power had marked them for silence. The professional theory thrived because of the cleanliness of the crime scene. No struggle, no forced entry, no witnesses. It had the sterile feel of something rehearsed, something executed with efficiency. To many, that suggested military precision or ties to organized crime. But skeptics pointed out, why these 3 women? They weren't high profile. They weren't involved in dangerous business. They were ordinary, and that ordinariness made the theory harder to swallow. Unless, of course, it wasn't about who they were, but about being in the wrong place, at the wrong time, on the wrong night. Still, the professional job theory lingers in Springfield's lore. It's the one that makes people glance at strangers in suits, or at black cars parked on quiet streets, and wonder if something far larger brushed against their small town that night. The problem with theories is that they multiply. They breed in silence. And with every unanswered question, Springfield grew heavier with speculation. At first, theories felt like hope. Each one carried the possibility of solving the puzzle, of finding the women, of delivering closure. But over the years, they became chains. They bound the families to cycles of false leads and cruel letdowns. They kept the community from healing because every conversation circled back to the same night, the same vanishing, the same unknowable truth. For the relatives of Sherrill, Susie, and Stacy, the theories were salt in a wound that never closed. Every new claim raised fragile hope. Every debunking shattered it all over again. One mother described it as drowning, surfacing for a breath of possibility, only to be pulled under by disappointment. Humans crave answers. Our minds are designed to close loops, to find patterns, to explain. The Springfield Three case defies that instinct. It leaves loops open, stories half told, endings unwritten. And so, people invent possibilities. They cling to theories because theories feel safer than silence. Even if a theory is dark, even if it's cruel, it is something. And something is easier to live with than nothing. For Springfield, the not knowing became a kind of collective madness. Over 3 decades, the case has been dissected in living rooms, debated in newspapers, reimagined in documentaries, and picked apart on internet forums. Each generation rediscovers the case, and each generation invents its own theories. The mystery has become part of the city's identity, a shadow woven into its history. Theories can be tools. They can guide investigations, open doors, and inspire questions. But they can also mislead, waste time, and trap people in cycles of obsession. In the Springfield Three case, they've done both. Each theory leaves a mark. The stranger theory kept Springfield afraid of shadows. The someone they knew theory sowed suspicion among neighbors. The concrete theory tied the city's skyline to its ghosts. The green van theory made every passing vehicle a phantom. The Robert Craig Cox theory gave the horror a face. And the professional job theory turned Springfield's tragedy into a story of chilling possibility. None of them delivered closure. All of them delivered weight. And in that weight, the Springfield Three remained trapped, suspended between presence and absence, forever missing but never gone. In the end, theories are the echoes of the silence left behind. They are Springfield's attempt to speak into the void, to demand answers from an unyielding night. But as the years stretch on, one truth becomes clear. Theories alone cannot solve this mystery. They may keep the story alive, but they cannot bring the women home. And for the families, the unanswered question remains the same as it did on June 7th, 1992. Where are Sherrill, Susie, and Stacy? Theories may haunt us, but only the truth can set us free. In the summer of 1992, Springfield froze in shock. The city had never experienced anything like it. A triple disappearance was unheard of, especially in a quiet neighborhood, in a home that looked so ordinary. By the fall, students returned to school, parents went back to work, businesses opened their doors, and the hum of a small Midwestern city continued. From the outside, Springfield looked unchanged. But for those closest to the 3 missing women, time itself refused to move forward. For Janice McCall, Stacy's mother, every day began the same way, with a phone by her side, waiting for a call that never came. Every ring jolted her heart into hope, only for silence or wrong numbers to follow. She learned to live in a state of constant readiness, as if the answer might arrive at any moment. For friends of Suzanne Streeter, every gathering carried the ache of one missing chair. Her laughter, once so constant, had become an echo that never returned. Birthdays passed without her. Holidays arrived with her absence sitting heavier than any winter snow. For relatives of Sherrill Levitt, every birthday candle was another cruel reminder. She should have been there, watching her daughter grow, meeting milestones, holding grandchildren. Instead, her life was frozen at 47, unfinished. The rest of Springfield moved on. But for these families, the clock has never moved past June 7th, 1992. In true crime, closure is rare. But in Springfield, closure never even came close. The investigation produced no bodies, no confession, no definitive evidence, just a trail of broken leads and fading theories. Police chased thousands of tips. Psychics claimed visions. Searchers combed forests and fields, garages and rivers. Still nothing. Every anniversary became a ritual of disappointment. Reporters revisited the case, asking the same questions, showing the same smiling photos of 3 women frozen in time. Documentaries aired, promising new leads. Podcasts picked it apart in detail, laying out timelines, suspects, and theories. Internet forums dissected every piece of evidence until there was nothing left but speculation. Each new retelling brought a spark of hope. Each spark burned out into the same cold truth: no one knows. The Springfield Police Department still keeps the case open. The files remain on desks, yellowing with age. Evidence sits in boxes, carefully preserved in case one day DNA or technology can pull answers from silence. Tips still trickle in, even decades later. But without resolution, the case feels less like an investigation and more like a haunting, a wound that refuses to close. If law enforcement slowed, the families never did. Janice McCall became the voice of determination. She refused to let Stacy's name fade into the blur of unsolved mysteries. She held vigils, ran press conferences, stood before cameras, and pleaded with the public to remember her daughter. She partnered with missing persons organizations, turning her grief into advocacy. Her life became defined by a single mission: to find Stacy. She once said, "When your child is missing, you never stop being a parent. You never stop looking. You never stop hoping." Sherrill's family battled a quieter grief. Sherrill had been a hard-working woman, a single mother who had fought for stability, only to be stolen away in the prime of her life. Her relatives carried her memory, but often away from the public spotlight, shouldering their grief privately. For Susie's friends, there was guilt, a heavy, unshakable guilt. Many believed they should have stayed with her that night. Others wondered if they had missed some hidden warning sign. Survivors' guilt became part of their lives, woven into every milestone they reached that Susie never would. For these families, survival became advocacy. Their fight was not only for answers, but for the dignity of the women they loved. Before June 1992, Springfield was the kind of town where doors were left unlocked. Kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, and neighbors borrowed sugar without knocking. After June 7th, everything changed. The disappearance created a culture of suspicion. Parents no longer let children roam freely. Teenagers who once celebrated carefree high school summers now faced strict curfews. Women carried pepper spray in their purses. Police patrols grew more visible. Neighborhood watch groups multiplied. The case altered Springfield's identity. To outsiders, it was no longer just a quiet Missouri city. It became the town where 3 women vanished without a trace. Even today, ask longtime residents, and they will tell you that summer marked the end of innocence. The The story of the Springfield Three became bigger than the town itself. Television picked it up. America's Most Wanted aired a segment. Unsolved Mysteries explored the disappearance. Later, People magazine investigates revisited the case. Podcasts dissected every detail. YouTube documentaries revisited it again and again, each drawing millions of curious viewers. The women's faces became symbols of loss, printed on missing posters, etched into billboards, embedded into nightly news reels. Every retelling amplified the mystery but deepened the wound. For the families, it was a double-edged sword. Awareness kept the case alive, but each telling reopened their pain. They grew accustomed to strangers knowing their story, to hearing it turned into headlines and sound bites. Their grief had become public property. Decades later, one man still taunts the memory of the Springfield Three, Robert Craig Cox. From prison, he claimed to know the women were murdered that very night. He hinted at knowledge he refused to share. He dangled hope like bait, only to yank it away with a smirk. For some, he is nothing more than a liar feeding on tragedy, using the pain of families to stay relevant. For others, he remains the closest thing to the truth the families may ever have. The worst part? Time is on his side. He once said he would reveal the full story after his mother dies. Until then, Springfield waits in torment, trapped in Cox's cruel game of silence. Even for detectives who worked the case, the Springfield Three is a scar that never healed. Many retired officers describe it as the one case that kept them awake at night. They remember the broken porch light, the erased answering machine, the endless theories. They speak of regret that the scene was contaminated before they arrived, regret that so much evidence was lost, regret that they never cracked the code. For them, justice unfinished feels like failure. They may have left the force, but they never left the case. It still lives in the back of their minds, another ghost of Springfield. 30 years later, there are no graves to visit, no memorials carved in stone. The families have had to create their own rituals. Candles lit each year, vigils held on anniversaries, names spoken aloud, so they will not fade. In many ways, memory has become the only justice left. The Springfield Three live on in photographs tucked into wallets, in old yearbooks, in home videos, in laughter frozen on VHS tapes. They live on in documentaries and in the whispers of Springfield residents who still lock their doors a little tighter because of that night. For younger generations, the case has become a cautionary tale. Parents who once lived through it tell their children the story as a warning. Don't stay out too late. Always tell me where you're going. Lock the doors. The disappearance of Sherrill, Susie, and Stacy reshaped not only Springfield, but how parents raised their children. The fear didn't vanish. It was passed down like an heirloom. Perhaps the most haunting legacy of the Springfield Three is silence. The silence of the house on East Delmar Street. The silence of police files that never found closure. The silence of families left with questions that grow heavier with age. And the silence of Springfield itself, a town that still whispers about a green van, a shattered light, a message erased. That silence may be the loudest legacy of all. The story of the Springfield Three is more than a mystery. It is a wound carved into the heart of a city, a family, and a nation. It is about three women whose lives were cut short not only by violence, but by absence, an absence that has lasted for more than 3 decades. And though time has passed, the story has never ended. Because until answers come, until the truth is known, the Springfield Three are not just a mystery. They are a haunting. 3 women vanished. 30 years later, their families still wait for answers. Their names must never be forgotten. If their story moved you, share this video, keep their memory alive, and tell us in the comments, what do you believe happened to the Springfield Three? Your voice might help keep this case in the public eye. Subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries that refuse to rest. And together, let's make sure silence never has the final word.